Thanks for having me.
All right, in the news today, so much talk about recapitalization of the Nigerian banks.
Yes.
The first time we heard about recapitalization, I don't know of your generation, but for my generation was in 2005.
Correct.
When Professor Chukwuma Soludo was CBN governor. And we had about 89 banks then. But for some of us whose father did not have much money in the banks, we didn't suffer. But I remember families, and we all remember families, that kept out, they were saying a bank has failed and a man's life earning. You know, so many people will go back to the village when that happens. When he came up with that, the banks were required to have 25 billion naira. Yeah. That was the idea then. So many things happened. We started to hear about mergers. We started to hear about acquisitions and dissolution of banks. So we had 24. Then we were told that this 24 is 24. The only thing that will ever happen is any bank that can't stand alone will simply merge. And we've seen that happen, like Access Bank, Intercontinental. I started with Intercontinental Bank, you know, and then there was blah, 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 and then, you know, I'm now with Access. Some people started with Diamond, for instance, and now they've been, they've ported and all of that. We heard that was what will keep on happening. Now, 2024, Yemika Dosho is also talking about recapitalization. Some people have argued, and we had this off-the-camera discussion last week, you know, some people have argued, and maybe I have listened to them more, and I seem to believe them. They've said these banks have about 3.8 trillion. That why wouldn't the CBN allow for these banks to simply draw from that and pay? But the CBN is saying, no, we need fresh you know, money, injection of funds to the tune of, I think, $3 billion. Now, we've heard some banks complain, and we've also heard some banks like the CBN, like I said, some banks are trying to say, okay, we'll look for these monies, you know, from foreign investors, and we're going to get this done. But then today, we are hearing that the stock market is losing about, or has lost about 633 billion naira. Now, to some of us who are poor, we think there is much money. Really explain to us what's going on.
Wow. You know, thanks again for having me. Well, you know, sometimes, you know, some of these ministers or the government officials have a clear view and picture of where they are taking the economy to. And sometimes we at this level don't really have, you know, that picture. What I do know is that our GDP is about 460, 470 billion presently. And Kadoso has said something sometime that he wants to, or they want to take GDP to about $1 trillion. You understand? Dollars. You understand? And essentially, you cannot do this without growing capacity. And for you to grow capacity, what that means is that you need to expand the capacity of these banks to fund, you know, businesses, to fund, you know, production, to fund, you know, assets, to fund all manner of things. And you've looked at our banks, and you're looking at their capacity, and you feel that presently what they have may not be able to fund that. You understand why you also do that? You're trying to also defend the local banking system, you know, because if you're serious about some of these things, I mean, some of these foreign banks can come and set up, and what some of them do is that they set up, they do business, they repatriate the funds, you know, back to their countries. And we don't benefit, foreign banks, you understand? And you don't really want that, because already we are having some foreign banks coming into the system, you understand? Sometimes they fund, you know, some local, we have some new banks that came up within the past 2 or 3 years, you understand? So they, like I said, they have a picture that we are not seeing, and they understand the, you know, the financing needs of the system to be able to grow, you know, that. They may not be able to come to 1 trillion, but they may actually catapult, you know, our growth to about 600-700, which is a massive leap if they achieve that. So the point I'm making is that, you know, for us to grow the economy to the size they really want, the banks need to come up in terms of a capital base, and which is why they started talking about capitalization. And just like you mentioned too, it's having a kind of effect on the stock market. You understand? Because the stock market is driven by sentiments and plenty of emotions. You understand? Once they fly the kite, because that's what they normally do. That's what Soludo did. They fly the kite. You know, it may not be a clear pronouncement. They fly the kite. This is where we're headed. You know, it starts immediately. You understand? So what we are seeing is that investors are holding on, you know, to funds, and now so many banks are declaring, you know, dividends that are paying, you know, within this month, and some may not want to invest in other stuff because they are making, so many banks are paying hugely. I may even begin to mention, some are paying so much. And what investors?
You mean to invest, they're paying so much to investors?
Investors, you understand, to their shareholders, so to say,
yes,
you understand?
yes.
And what you do is to look at some, stocks that you think they have done well, because the stock market has also done very well. On year analysis, you will see some, companies returning about 300, 400, 500, 600%, you understand? And which people don't really know so much about, you understand? So, because of those sentiments and emotions that drive the stock market, they are holding on, they are holding back, they are not reinvesting, they are looking at what the banks want to come up with. In fact, some banks have even said they want to, come back to the market and, pursue for this money. So the government wants to grow the economy, and for them to grow the economy, the banks must grow in their capital base to be able to fund businesses, to fund assets, and to fund all manner of investments. And for them to do that, they may not rely so much on what they have presently. So they need to, call for more funds, you understand, even if foreign portfolio investors, local investors, for them to bring money to their system to be able to fund that and grow the economy. That's simply what's happening. And on the stock market side, people want to also invest in that, system. And for them to do that, invariably is having an effect on the stock market. And it's going to continue in the next 2-3 months. Once they come back into the market, it's going to start affecting the stock market.
When who comes back into the market, you mean?
When the banks come, because they're coming to the market. They're coming to raise the 500.
True.
They're coming to the market. They're coming to raise this fund.
No, let me ask you this, because you implied, in fact, you said it, you didn't imply it when you were talking. You talked about the foreign portfolio investments. Now, so many of us have this thing when we hear about this recapitalization, and I'm inclusive.
Yes.
One needs to be honest, that this will actually be foreign investors coming in, because when we are talking about that amount to the tune of about $3 billion, and something also seems to prove us right, because those who are pulling out, investors who are pulling out their profits right now, like you said, this kite has been flown and they are scared, and they are pulling out their funds, mostly will be local investors. Want to, the 633 billion will be local investors. Now, you talked about three things.
Yes.
You talked about the capacity of the banks, because one, looking at the economy, and you want to boost the economy. You talked about the capacity of the banks, which should be looked at, and maybe that is what the CBN is looking at. You also talked about growing the economy, which is what they want. And like they've said, I think it is Tinubu's, what is the name of that economic, something policy, there's an economic policy team. Seems to be one of the ambitious plans they have, that Nigeria by 2030 should have a GDP of $1 trillion. Maybe that's possible, and you've just told us that we're about 460 billion, which is a far cry from where we want to be. But there are some people who think that with all of these policies that makes, first of all, the investors scared, pull off their money. I don't know where they will be taking their money. I don't know where they, if you pull that amount of money from the banks, I don't know where you will take that money. But anyway, they've pulled it out. That also, what the CBN maybe should have thought about is the fiscal side of all of this. That what they should have thought about is, if we want to grow the economy, how do we encourage SMEs, for instance? And that the fiscal policies of this administration, the CBN is there, the administration is coming up with things like taking off fuel subsidy, will affect this, the ultimate goal is to grow the economy. That fiscal policy will affect this. That floating the naira, well, I don't know where you stand on this, and I want to know your opinion on that. That floating the naira, maybe we might say the CBN, this, CBN as we know it, leadership was not on board when that happened. That's true. Right? But then, things like that. Things like yesterday, taking off tariff from electricity. Today in the news, we see so many fallouts from that. And they think, even if these banks inject this fund the CBN is looking for, even if the banks come up with it, and you have it, yes, we're going to get Forex, It's just in numbers that what will happen in numbers is, yes, with all of this inflow of the FX, we are going to see the Naira maybe bounce back to maybe 900 Naira or 850 or whatever. I don't know. I can't do the maths right now. Maybe help us with the maths. But at the end of the day, what will happen is still what we see in the news today. The Naira is appreciating, as they say, but things are getting more expensive day by day. So how will this grow? Because at the end of the day, it is the intention is to grow the economy. So how does this then work out?
You know, like I said, you know, sometimes these things are intricate, but they can also be simplified.
Okay.
You understand? You know, because when we want to grow the economy, you're expecting funds to come into the system. And mind you, in spite of the insecurities and so many things that's happening in the economy, you have, you know, like our treasury bills pay about 19–20%, which is unprecedented. True. And you have, you know, so many investment asset classes that we have in Nigeria pay so much, unlike what's happening in foreign nations. Now, in developed countries, now, once CBN calls for this, one of the investment groups, so to say, when we talk about foreign portfolio investors, you know, that normally bring in funds into the economy, usually Nigerians who are abroad. In fact, it's even, you know, the funding system affects, you know, the FX. Maybe we'll talk about it later. But the issue is that once these banks want to recapitalize, they go to the markets and they begin to, you know, call for funds. And you have Nigerians who are abroad wanting to invest. That class comes into the system. The funds come into the system first before you begin to talk about foreign portfolio. That's the real foreigners. And I remember then in 2005, 2006, or 7, CBN has a mechanism of understanding, because they don't also want foreigners to somehow take over some banks if you don't monitor the level of dollar inflow, pound inflow, all those kind of inflows into the system. Which, do you understand? So they regulate and they monitor so many of those things. But I'm telling you that the first set are Nigerians who are outside. They want to invest in some of these banks that are returning so much because they study this. Money will come in from there. Then some Nigerians, because they're going to advertise, they're going to share their numbers, they're going to show indices, they're going to, you understand? You know, they will invest. Not just taking money from the stock market already, but they will also sell off, you know, some stocks that they have in different, that are not returning so much, and invest in the banking sector that's paying so much, you understand? Then some will also look at some idle funds, because like it or not, some Nigerians still have idle funds, which, you know, is not yielding so much, which is actually devaluing. You understand? If you look at how the economy is working, you understand? So the ideal thing will be for them to now begin to take it into, you know, the banking you know, sector, you know, for them to yield so much. So, like I'm saying, they want to grow the economy. And they are looking at, you know, routes through which funds will come into the system. And you talked about, you know, why won't government maybe float the Naira? Why won't government begin to fund the SMEs? Who will fund the SMEs? It's still the banking sector. And the banking sector cannot fund the SMEs if they don't have so much capacity, because you have so many mega businesses coming up. We have Dangote Refinery, you have some other people who want to get into the power sector, and they will require funding. So while you're funding the big ticket transactions, you need to also fund the SMEs. You need to also, government is also, you know, bringing up so much money to be able to get to the root. There are so many things that are doing at the same time, and they have looked at the economy and they feel that based on what we have, in spite of the assets, you know, the trillions of assets that these banks have, it may not be able to fund growth as we want it. So there's a need for us to do whatever we can, you know, to bring in, you know, foreign repatriate funds from Nigerians abroad, you know, bring in funds from those who have seen this economy that in spite of our challenges, there's still so much interest we're paying. You understand? Prospects of growth. Because abroad, you know, some investments were about 2–3–4% annually. But ours, treasury bill about 19%, fixed deposits, you know, 10%, real estate in some cases annually at 5%, 40%. You know, so when you look at these asset classes, you still see money, possibility of money being made in this economy.
Especially in the banks.
You know, that's also another issue. But you understand? So let me just make a point, because ideally, you know, the banking system, I'm not supporting some things, but the banking system is supposed to be a kind of regulator, unofficial regulator of the economy. Which means that growth in banking sector, especially in profits, should ideally, dovetail to growth in so many other sectors.
Yes.
So it is an anomaly. It is wrong for the banks to be declaring this level of profits while so many companies are closing down.
Thank you. That brings me to the question.
You understand? And so many companies are closing down. People are losing jobs, and the economy is not functioning.
Okay.
It is totally wrong, and so many things are wrong, and we can actually guess what those things are.
And
but no.
Then you need to speak to the question, because honestly, I honestly think you either did not or don't want to speak to the question. Okay, I want you to speak to this question right now. You just talked about it. Here we have our banks declaring huge profits. Because when we talk about the 3.8 trillion, the banks are reported to have, these are simply profits they've not. These are simply profits they've not given off to their investors or shareholders, like you call them, right? Now this is huge. But then in the same country, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, that is where, I mean, you are an industry watcher yourself. You're an industry player yourself. Now, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, I can't remember, was it last month or so? They were talking about 328 or thereabouts. Companies, production lines shutting down or being distressed thereabout.
I agree.
While our banks are, declaring all of this profit. Now, the question I want to ask is, and that is for those who, like I said, maybe we've heard from those guys so much, from those who are talking about the CBN, this might not be the route to. I'm not trying to overflow the question, but let us just look at this, right? The CBN, Section 2 of the CBN Act, gives the central bank that responsibility, squarely on the doorstep of the CBN, to supervise and regulate our banks.
That's true.
Now, when it comes to these banks recapitalizing, let us say they recapitalize. Okay, we agree, they recapitalize. Bringing all of this fund, you talked about them now having the capacity. They have the capacity. But then, you can't talk about anything that has to do with the finance sector, governance and everything. The key word there is trust. What kind of trust can we put on the CBN? What kind of trust can we put on the banks? When all of this while, with all of these profits they've been declaring, we've not seen the CBN, first of all, use its power of supervising and regulation to order our banks, which is what is done in all of these claims you talked about. These claims you said, are declared maybe 2%, 3%. Yeah. What we see is the equivalent of the CBN really mandating these banks. Maybe we say where we want to go to is agriculture. Maybe we say where we want to go to is tech. We decide for ourselves. We look at our economy. We look at our country. We look at the unique strength we have. Say banks, 40% of your loans, apart from the BOI and all of that, and Bank of Agriculture, aside from that, say 40% of your bank should be of your loans. And we want to see that at the end of the day, should be dedicated to this and this and this. If what you want to do is empower women, maybe, or people between the ages of 15 or 18 and 30, you say, we want to see your books at the end of the day, that 40% of your loans goes to this. We don't get to see all of that from the CBN. And then on the side of the banks, all of these profits, we don't actually see any bank coming up to say, okay, at the end of the day, take pride in saying, okay, we are responsible for this industrial hub here, this thing here, this thing here, this mega company here. We don't see them bragging about all of these things. We just see profit. So the issue I want to talk about is, okay, we've agreed. This is government policy. Nobody can stop them. But can we have that trust that recapitalization is going to achieve what you talked about? Giving banks capacity, and then that capacity ultimately, I'll go back to this, grow the Nigerian economy, because that's what we want to see at the end of the day.
I agree. You understand, you talked about trust, but you also have the issue of regulatory capacity. You understand? Because it's one thing, I mean, if you've worked in the banking sector, you see wonderful policies come out from the CBN. You understand? Regulatory policies, ways to, check the economy, ways to counter some funny acts of the banks and all that. They're on paper wonderful. But you also begin to look at the regulatory capacity to be able to monitor effectively what these banks do. You understand? You have the CBN at Oka, you have at Asaba. You have how many banks? Over 300, 400, 500 bank branches. You understand? Doing all sorts. You can map out some funds and say, okay, you want to grow tech, you want to grow the youths, etc. SMEs, people within the 18 and 30 years, you understand? And the banks bring out money for that. But the issue is that when you dig deep, when you now get in to check those who are that 1830, on paper you see 1830. In reality, are they really 1830 people? You understand? So it brings me back to the issue of regulatory capacity to effectively monitor. So we honestly have a dysfunctional system. Like I said, so it has to do with what the CBN says. It also has to do with what truly happens in the economy. You understand? Because there's no way you can. In fact, when you bring some of these guys abroad to come and look at the economy, those who understand, who know, they won't understand what is happening. You understand? Because especially, yes, I will tell you, they won't really understand. They won't, on paper, they don't need to get into the banks to be able to, dimension what's happening. Because all these other segments or sectors are dying. Then you are growing massively year on year by 100% in a year. What kind of business did you do? Which sectors did you fund? Which companies did you fund? Which segments grew so massively while you're growing and all that? You must have funded a business for you to be able to make that level of money. So unless you're debiting people 15 naira every night when they are asleep or something, there's something that's dysfunctional. When you allocate these effects, does it really go to the companies that should, bring you what they purport to bring, or somehow you round trip or you sell off the money somewhere, make huge money? So ideally, if we have that regulatory capacity, the government or the CBN should be able to begin to point out, to let the banks show them the businesses you did, what they yielded, and how much, you declared or how much you made that would have led to $1 trillion. 500, a bank declaring 600 billion, another 700 billion in an economy that is dwindling and dying, and the inflation rate getting to about at 1.7 and something. So these things, that's why I said it is quite dysfunctional. And if we begin to look at it, there's no way, one wouldn't begin to think of getting to put the questions to CBN, not even what the banks are doing, to find out what they're essentially regulating. So the money you're asking these banks to grow or to find, about 500 billion, whatever, did you actually, is it based on what you see on paper, or you actually went down to investigate to find out the one you have? How have you utilized it to help or to impact the economy? I can tell you, without even looking at any numbers or papers, that they or we don't really understand so much what's happening in the system, in the banking system, and which is the problem, or which is what's affecting the economy so much, and it's wrong.
And just to say, the NBS will be coming up with its
data very soon.
Data. You understand? Let's see what the inflation rate is like.
There's no. I mean, the last one, there's no way it won't have gotten to about 33 in spite of the funds. The rates going down. You understand? Food inflation is also about
I want to say, God help us. I'm in Nigeria.
Yes, yes, you understand. But there are things we should really do.
True.
There are things we should really do. You understand? If we are funding agric, even though yes, we have our challenges, because if we want to fund agric, we also have to look at the security. You understand? The man you want to give 100 million to.
Can he go to farm?
Can he go to farm?
Can he go to farm?
Do you understand?
Yes.
So you have some of these challenges there, but governments must be sure of their acts before they come out and say, go and find 500 billion from anywhere, and all that. It may still get back to the issues that we already have in the system. All
right, we'll go for this short break. When we get back, I will take on that question. Let's look at this, because honestly, and I'll be honest about this. In 2020, we looked at Buhari's administration, and that administration, we got to 97%.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes, in 2020, reports quoted that we got to 97%. And so for every, just like you explained, for every
1 naira will borrow
1 naira,
97 kobo or something.
No, government revenue. For every, government revenue to debt servicing.
To debt servicing, okay.
Just debt servicing, we got to 97%, right? In 2020. And there was, when Buhari, I think it was Buhari who, the money the National Assembly was debating and then got at the end of the day to finance their 160 million naira SUVs. It was actually said to be a process started by Buhari's administration. When they talked about that borrowing, people said we are going to move down to 114%. Okay. I don't know where we are right now. So that's why I think maybe the extra, but then let's look at the 2024 appropriation bill, because that is where this whole information is coming from. Now, the provision for sinking fund is about 8.2 trillion.
16. Now, the other part is
16 is when you now add the debt servicing. Debt servicing is about 7.8. So when you merge the two, you're looking at about 16 trillion. Now, this 16 trillion is how much? What amount is the budget? I think it's about 20-something trillion.
About 30. Okay, 32.
Is it?
Depending, yes, it's about depending on the exchange rate you're using.
Depending on the exchange rate. But then when you look at the benchmark for all of the indices that was looked at for us to have this budget, government revenue was budgeted about 19.5. Now, when we are looking at 16 going off, and then you are expecting to make 19.5. Which, well, they've also said that it's not all gloom, because when you look at inflation and everything, we are going to make about 30 trillion naira. But then the question I want to ask you is this. In the light of all of this conflicting, what do you think should happen to this budget? We have two schools of thought. There is a school of thought that says, and that is also supported by the National Assembly, because they've talked about we need to rework this budget.
Yes.
We need to rework this budget in the light of so many things. One, in the light of the revenue we are going to make with inflationary trends and all of those things, we're going to have a problem. Yes. With the volatility of the naira, we're going to have a problem. And then finally is also the benchmark.
Yes.
We looked at a different, I can't remember the figure now, but we looked at a different price for a barrel of oil, which is where our, sadly, our budget is mostly hinged on. And then the fourth one is also, well, the exchange rate. It was 800 naira.
Yes, that's true. That's the
at the point to move to 1,900, and then we started coming up. We are looking at maybe getting stable at 1,000 naira. So even if we get stable at 1,000 naira for a while, there's a gap. Now, so there are those who think, bring back this. In fact, let's start a new, let's have a fresh budget. While there are others who think, well, what should happen is accountability. I think Sarah was saying something today. Yes, so what do you think at this point? Because clearly this is not working. What do you think should happen to the 2024 appropriation bill?
I totally agree with those who insist or who feel that we should bring back this budget and let there be a comprehensive review. You understand? Because we are not, it's not just about the index of exchange rate. It's not just about the barrel of oil. It's not just about the volume of oil. It's not. There are so many things that have become distorted. You understand? Not talking about the padding they talked about when we started. You understand? So there are so many things that have gone wrong, and you can't be looking at all this and still feel you can comfortably and confidently run with this budget. Let us bring it back and tell ourselves the truth. If the benchmark, it would have been better if we had benchmarked on, say, 1,000. And we are seeing the naira come to about 900 or whatever. That's a plus. Instant plus already. You understand? So I feel that government should, they may look at it and feel that it's a thing of shame because this is their budget. It's not Buhari's budget. It's their budget. You understand? So they should, swallow their pride, bring back this budget and say, hey, let's look at this budget again. So many indices are wrong, you understand, based on the reality of this economy. And let's recast this budget and tell people. I think they may even achieve some more kudos. People can appreciate them. People may begin to appreciate them. For transparency and honesty and facing reality than, trying to force your way. Because what it will lead to is just this borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, for you to be able, and depleting our reserves too. You understand? Because we've lost so much money in the past, 2 weeks or whatever, trying to defend the naira. We've also depleted our, foreign reserves, just for us to be able to, come down. Which is why people are even saying that this naira that's actually coming down is a fluke. People feel that it's a fake, you understand, because you're just depleting, our reserves to be able to defend the naira, and the thing is coming down because there's actually, apart from what you've done in the, the FX part, ensuring that monetary policy and all that, there's actually no other thing you've done on other sectors to be able to bring back this naira. We are not seeing increase in productivity. Inflation rate is going up, and naira is coming down. So what essentially is happening? So I am of the opinion, just like the others, that we should look at this budget again, tell ourselves the truth, and begin to reconfigure the numbers. That's what I feel.
Now that really answers the question. But let me put that question to you very straight, because that is what the common man. I also feel that. I feel that a lot. Before today, before now, Nigerians, we've always known one thing, and that is how much is the dollar going for.
Yes.
Once you tell a Nigerian, then they will know exactly how much they can pay for something.
That's true.
So if I want to buy a laptop, if I want to buy a phone, before now we've always known that the price of how much the dollar goes for affects my phone. Yes. So if I bought this phone when the dollar, for instance, was 500 naira. Once you tell me it is 550 naira, I might not know how much. But if I bought it for 50,000 naira, I know I should be looking at maybe 55,000 naira.
Yeah, that's true.
This is how we've always, I mean, the common man, this is what we only know. So if I buy Gary, and there's always been this argument, is Gary going by the dollar? But people will tell you, but then they buy other things, you know, like fuel, like this, like they pay school, they do all of those things. But this is the first time, at least in the life of my own generation, okay, that the dollar got to 1,000 naira and things increased. The dollar got to 1.5, swore. The dollar got to, I think at one point we got to 1,900 naira, and it increased. Now, from 1,900 naira, you know, the prices of goods and services, especially goods, kept on increasing.
Yes.
But then, now we see that backward trend from 1,918, you know,
up to 7.
But then, even now that it is at 1,100 and something, right?
1,120.
Whatever you were buying, okay, yesterday I bought something, was it on Saturday or something? I bought something that I used to buy for 3,200 when the dollar was at 1,008 or 7. Now it is 1,001 something, but it has increased in price. Now, can you explain to us in very clear terms my grandmother can understand? What is going on? Honestly, some of us don't understand it.
You know, like I said when I talked about the stock market part, so much sentiments and emotions rule things that happen, and speculations. You understand? When we talked about 15, 16, 17, those things were squarely based on speculations and sentiments, because it was what's happening in the black market, not really the official, but the black market also affects the official part. So the official was still at about 800, 900, if you see anywhere. You understand? But those things were driven by the forces of demand and supply. You know, the more, you have, a very pretty lady in the village, she becomes so valuable because every man wants to, get close to her. That's elementary, explanation. That's what normally happens. So, people were, we had stories of people who asked the BDC operators, that's the FX dealers, hold my 100 billion, wherever you see dollar, no matter the rate, buy for me. You understand? So those things were really affecting the exchange rates. Now, coming down to your question, there's usually a lag time. You don't expect that
Let's have that in 1 minute.
You don't expect that once this goes down, everything goes down immediately. Because there are so many things. Like I said, everything is dependent on speculations and sentiments. And people feel that let's wait a little, let's be cautionary about this. Let's wait a little bit and see what happens. Let so many other aspects of the economy, let the transportation go down, let the fuel price go down, let the gas price go down, let productivity, let so many other segments and aspects begin to come down. Then maybe we'll now begin to see what we'll do, to come down. But if you expect it to be instant, once this goes down, it doesn't happen immediately. There's a lag time. Oftentimes, some people will tell you 6 months, 1 year, but there's no guarantee that this will also remain. So everything is a function of sentiments and speculation. All
right, may God allow us to survive this lag time. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chinedu. You really made today's show, quite informative. We thank you very much. All right, Mr. Mark Davis.
Yeah, I think in a few seconds, or even very few minutes, we can look at something away from this money situation and look at security. There's been so much news about the Nigerian army recruiting Boko Haram people into the army, and there has been this trending story of how a soldier killed his lover and suspected to be a Boko Haram terrorist who was brought into the Nigerian army. Now the Nigerian army has refuted those claims of recruiting repentant terrorists into its ranks. The army was reacting to claims in some quarters that one private, Adamu Muhammad, who killed his lover, Hawaku Tabra, in Enugu barracks and hit her corpse, was a repentant Boko Haram terrorist. Now, though the director of Army Public Relations, Major General Onyema Nwachukwu, confirmed the incident in a statement yesterday, he denied that Muhammad was a repentant terrorist. He stressed that the Nigerian Army had never enlisted repentant terrorists into its ranks. I would have gone on and on, but looking at the time, I just want to keep it there.
It has to do with our information management system. communication and public relations.
I
So we are
completely
always reactive instead of proactive. You've investigated and established that there was an incident. Come out and tell people immediately. You know, now that everything moves at the speed of light, information and all that, you know, you have social media reporting and, you know, taking their own version. You know, instead of government should have come out immediately and refuted it before. In fact, government should have come out and told us exactly what happened before we now begin to, you know, come up with our own speculations and all that.
All right, still Joe German. News Review will be here same time, same station tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a beautiful day ahead.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chinedu, for coming around today. My name is Mark Davis.
Thank you, Mark Davis. Thank you, Jude.
We'll come back tomorrow.